Hello and welcome to the program, UFO Warning. In this episode, we're talking about Dick Cheney and alien detainment. That's correct, Dick Cheney and alien detainment. Of course, we're talking about the former, now deceased Vice President Dick Cheney and ET aliens, not the regular variety. And this story does get off into some high strangeness. Now, just before I get into this, you can let me know in the comments. I'm thinking about just completely deleting the Twitter channel altogether. First of all, it has been kind of useless for me. Subscribers never increase. I don't think people really use Twitter that much. And it's, well, frankly, in my opinion, become such a cesspool over there. I don't spend a lot of time on it anymore. So getting ready just to, I believe, go ahead and cancel that channel out and be done with it more or less seems like a waste of time. If you find that outlet helpful, you can let me know. All right, getting back to this topic, I came across a couple news articles which we'll look at, and then AI gives me an overview. It says military intelligence whistleblower David Grusch claimed in August of 2026 that the late former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney oversaw a highly classified government program involving the detainment and interaction with live extraterrestrials. That in itself sounds troubling to me. I mean, what, do we have another Gitmo for ET aliens now? They say detainment. Well, that seems like a pretty nice way of saying locked up. And interaction, I've got to wonder if that involves some form of waterboarding, considering Dick Cheney was involved. It says the interview, speaking on the Dr. Phil podcast, former Air Force officer David Grusch alleged that the U.S. government recovered crashed, unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs, and held live alien entities. The Darth Vader reference, Grusch claimed he spoke with a former cabinet member who directly managed the issue for a vice president, whom he implied was Cheney, using the moniker often attributed to him. Yeah, Darth Vader did seem somewhat appropriate to me. Of course, there's lack of proof. No official government documentation, physical evidence, or independent verification supports these extraordinary claims, and myself, I wouldn't plan on seeing those anytime soon. Now, there is a lot of skepticism. It claims mainstream reception treated the assertions with heavy skepticism and humor, comparing the claims to science fiction rather than verified national security history. In prior comments, Cheney himself previously joked or demurred when asked about classified UFO briefings during media appearances, stating that any such information would be classified. Well, why not just come out and tell us the truth, you know? Yeah, really weird stuff. There's a link to this article over here at royanews.com. It's like a Middle Eastern website. It says whistleblower former U.S. VP oversaw live alien detainment. In a podcast interview, military intelligence whistleblower David Grusch claimed that late former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney oversaw a classified program involving the detainment and interaction with live extraterrestrials retrieved from crashed, unidentified anomalous phenomena. So they're not even calling these things craft anymore. Speaking on the Dr. Phil podcast, hosted by Dr. Phil McGraw, Grusch, a former U.S. Air Force intelligence officer who previously testified before Congress regarding alleged secret UFO crash-retrieval programs, detailed information he claims to have received from higher-ranking government officials. Quote, I know people who had direct interactions in a detainment situation, which sounds very Star Trek and sounds very crazy, but it's true, Grusch said during the interview. I spoke to a former cabinet member who directly worked the issue for a particular former vice president. You can guess which one, Darth Vader. During the interview, Grusch elaborated on how human personnel allegedly interacted with non-human entities retrieved from retrieval sites. He claimed that communication occurred through non-verbal means rather than spoken language. It is true that it is some sort of consciousness communication. Of course, people call it telepathy. I cannot begin to tell you how it works, but there is some sort of communication like that, Grusch stated, adding that he estimates between 25 and 100 non-human craft remain in government custody. Host Phil McGraw, who has increasingly focused on government transparency and UFO files, emphasized the broader imperative of public access to classification information following the interview. David's story is absolutely a reminder that asking hard questions and getting to the truth is every citizen's right, McGraw said. You may believe there's something there, you may believe we're alone, you may believe we're not, but you have a right to have information and think critically about it. Dick Cheney, who served as vice president under George W. Bush from 2001 to 2009, died on November 3, 2025 at age 84 due to complications from pneumonia, cardiac arrest, and vascular disease. Neither representatives for the Cheney estate nor the U.S. Department of Defense have validated Grusch's assertions, nor would I expect them to. They're kind of putting this story in the ground, but I did get a response out of AI. I have to wonder what's going on here. It tells me Cheney's position made him potentially important. This is concerning UFOs and aliens. Dick Cheney was Secretary of Defense under President George H.W. Bush from 1989 to 1993 and Vice President under George W. Bush from 2001 to 2009. That's a long period of time being right there at the center of power. Now, this matters because the modern UFO secrecy allegations generally concern highly classified military and intelligence programs rather than ordinary UFO investigations. As Secretary of Defense, Cheney was in an unusually powerful position to know about classified aerospace and intelligence programs. Later, as Vice President, he was one of the most powerful people in the U.S. government, but there is no publicly released government document proving that Cheney was involved in an extraterrestrial retrieval program. Now remember, when they say he was at the center of power, don't forget that after the 9/11 tragedy, when President Bush was brought in to be questioned, he wouldn't do it without Cheney. So Cheney was right there holding his hand the whole time. It almost seemed to a lot of us like Cheney was more the president than GW was. The 2001 UFO question is probably the most interesting documented connection. In 2001, Cheney was asked about UFOs during a radio interview. His response has become famous among UFO researchers because, rather than simply saying UFOs were nonsense, he essentially indicated that there were things he could not discuss because of classification. That doesn't establish extraterrestrial involvement. A defense secretary or vice president could be referring to classified aircraft, intelligence programs, satellites, weapons, systems, etc. Nevertheless, UFO researchers have interpreted Cheney's answer as evidence that he knew considerably more about the subject that he was willing to reveal. There's a documented history of government secrecy surrounding UFO investigations, although the National Archives says its historical records have not established extraterrestrial craft. Of course, take a look at the Black Vault and you'll find out that so oftentimes when researchers ask for documents, all they get are pages and pages that have been blacked out. Another thing, just the way that he was so obtuse about answering this question. Personally, I feel like Cheney was a bit of a narcissist. A lot of our leadership are really, sorry to say, they kind of think of themselves in kind of a big way. And so I think he kind of got a lot of personal satisfaction out of knowing something the rest of us couldn't. And I think that goes for a lot of these guys. The really explosive allegation, Cheney at the top of the pyramid, it says, this is where the story gets much more controversial. Journalist Walter Kern, who interviewed David Grusch, has said that Grusch privately characterized Cheney as being extremely high up in the alleged UFO secrecy structure. And that claim is circulated. Cheney was at or near the top of the alleged UFO pyramid. However, there's another important qualification. Grusch did not make this specific Cheney allegation in his public congressional testimony. Probably enjoys being above ground, don't you think? I don't know. Just my opinion. In fact, sources examining the claim point out that the Cheney at the top story comes largely from secondhand descriptions of private conversations rather than from a formal public statement by Grusch. I have to kind of disagree with this a little bit because with this latest interview with Dr. Phil, it does seem like Grusch is kind of putting the late vice president out there. Now it goes on and tells us the 2026 development is much more dramatic. There has now been a new allegation that takes the Cheney story considerably further. In August 2026, David Grusch appeared on the Dr. Phil podcast and reportedly claimed that Cheney was involved in what he described as a detainment situation involving recovered extraterrestrial beings. And that's, like I said, that's a real nice way of putting locked up. According to the reporting on the interview, Grusch said information had come from people who allegedly had direct knowledge of the situation, including a former cabinet-level member who worked closely with Cheney. The account also reportedly involved alleged communication with the beings through what Grusch described as consciousness communication. This whole consciousness communication thing, man, I tell you, it's getting a little out there, and it kind of concerns me. Kind of see some of this going on with Dr. Greer, where he's trying to communicate with these things. Well, he says, I guess he kind of believes that most of them are good. If there are some bad ones out there, they could certainly use this ability to mislead people. Well, the AI tells us this is an extraordinary allegation with this consciousness communication with these things, but again, it remains an allegation. There's currently no publicly available physical evidence or government documentation establishing that Cheney personally participated in the detention of extraterrestrial beings. Well, I don't think they're going to let him out there on the street walking around if they did find a couple of them, let me tell you. And when you have these SPAC projects where nobody can know what's going on outside the hands of 5 or 6 congresspeople, where oftentimes the president is not even in the loop, it opens up the door for all kinds of bad things to happen, and then for people like us to be called conspiracy theorists because we spot a conspiracy. AI tells us there is an older Cheney S4 story. There's another bizarre piece of Cheney mythology that predates Grusch. They're using the word mythology here, but maybe that's just to protect themselves from defamation. I don't know. UFO researcher Michael Sala published an account claiming that Cheney was taken into the alleged S4 facility near Area 51 around 1991. According to that account, Cheney supposedly viewed captured flying saucers, extraterrestrial bodies, and secret underground facilities. I wonder what you have to do to prove your level of trust before you're shown this kind of stuff. The allegation was attributed to a former security guard who claimed to have worked at the facility. This is far less substantiated than Cheney's documented government positions or his public statements about classified information. There is no publicly authenticated government record demonstrating that Cheney visited S4 and saw alien bodies. Why Cheney is such a compelling figure in UFO disclosure stories. And here's where the story becomes interesting from a historical perspective. Think about the alleged UFO legacy program as a chain. Start off with classified aerospace and intelligence programs, moves to the Department of Defense, then into the intelligence community, then into special access programs, then into senior political leadership, and then to the vice president. Cheney occupied positions extraordinarily close to the top of that structure. So you can see here, just by this list, from where the stuff would be made at, the programs, to the Defense Department, to the intelligence community, to these special access programs could be talking about, where maybe 5 or 6 congressmen have access to it. If he's getting to see this stuff, and then into senior political leadership, and then on the vice president, yeah, that shows a connection all along the way. Unlike a lot of VPs who just seem to be put in there by the president, big difference. Cheney occupied positions extraordinarily close to the top of that structure, it says, and he was known for operating within the national security establishment and for maintaining strict secrecy around classified matters. That's why UFO researchers have repeatedly focused on him, but there's a critical difference. Cheney had access to highly classified national security information and Cheney knew about recovered extraterrestrial spacecraft. The first is unequivocally true. The second has not been demonstrated publicly. Yeah, if they're out there, he knew about it. That's what I think. What makes the Grusch allegation particularly interesting, Grusch's 2023 congressional testimony is important because he didn't merely claim he had seen UFOs. He alleged that individuals inside the government had told him about a multi-decade program involving the recovery and exploitation of non-human craft. AARO subsequently investigated the historical claims and reached the opposite conclusion. Imagine that. It found no verifiable evidence that the U.S. government or private industry had possessed extraterrestrial technology, and said alleged hidden programs were either non-existent or misidentified conventional national security programs. Just think about how silly that is. Think of all the thousands and thousands of UFO sightings, just New Fork alone. And so we're to believe that AARO investigated all of these reported sightings, and they were all just written off as swamp gas, drones, the planet Venus. Come on. It tells us this creates a fascinating three-way conflict. Grusch and other whistleblowers claim there is a hidden retrieval program. Arrow says, we found no verifiable evidence of extraterrestrial technology. And the UFO researchers say the absence of publicly released evidence doesn't mean the programs don't exist. And now Cheney's name has entered that debate in a much more prominent way. I think that as some of these old guard begin to die off, people might start naming a few more names. We can hope. Clearly, we can't just say that Dick Cheney ran the secret alien program. But if you look at all the evidence and the history of Dick Cheney, you have to ask yourself, if there was a secret alien program, well, who would be better to run it than Dick Cheney, huh? Especially if you wanted to keep this away from the U.S. taxpayers. We know that Cheney was Secretary of Defense. He was Vice President. He had extraordinary access to classified national security information. And he was questioned about UFOs publicly, and he did not give us a straight answer. Also, don't forget, Dick Cheney kept getting these top secret security briefings after he left the White House as Vice President. Why would he need this stuff if he's not serving in government anymore? The allegations are that Cheney was supposedly near the top of the alleged UFO secrecy structure, that a former security guard allegedly claimed Cheney visited S4, and more recently, a Grusch has reportedly linked Cheney to an alleged extraterrestrial detainment situation. It's one of these things where maybe you don't have an actual picture of the guy there with the alien bodies, but after a while, there's so many people talking about it that you have to ask, wow, what's going on? And then when you consider how he acted when he was asked a simple question about this stuff, he didn't seem believable to me at all. It also tells us here that there is now an especially interesting research angle. The new Cheney-related Grusch allegations can be compared against Cheney's newly released vice presidential records and the National Archives UAP records collection. The archive is actively establishing a dedicated UAP records collection under the 2024 NDAA, so there is a legitimate documentary trail to investigate rather than relying solely on UFO lore. The problem with that is that these sanitized releases that we end up with so often, in the end, can be nothing more than a controlled narrative. And if the narrative is controlled, then I don't expect we're going to learn about the truth there from Dick Cheney. My own opinion, the way we're most likely to find out about this stuff, as far as these deep programs, underground bases where possibly aliens are kept detained permanently, it's going to be from some low-level security guard who maybe the powers that be have kind of overlooked a little bit. Maybe they thought they had this guy nailed dead to rights to where they would never talk about it. But we're talking about an operation that is big enough that I think there is a possibility there that there's going to be some person along the line somewhere facing a deathbed situation without family left behind, may get the truth out there or a little glimpse of that truth. But I find it interesting that Grusch has come out on the record on Dr. Phil's podcast and let us know that Darth Vader was there with those aliens. And we have to ask ourselves, how were they being questioned? And what are we doing to those things? And if they ever get out, what are they going to do to us? Crazy, crazy stuff. Hope you liked the program. If you did, don't forget to hit like, follow, subscribe. Doesn't cost a dime. Until next time, this is UFO Warning. Over and out.